Men are so simple and obey present necessities so much that he who deceives will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived. Niccolo Machiavelli. I learned this lesson the hard way back in 2018 when I was working at a tech startup in Austin. My business partner, someone I'd known since college, seemed like the most trustworthy person in the world. We'd grab beers after work, talk about our dreams, and I genuinely believed we were building something amazing together. That trust almost destroyed my career. The neuroscience behind trust is fascinating and terrifying. When someone shows us similarity, same background, interests, values, our brain releases oxytocin, literally the trust hormone. Professional con artists exploit this by creating false intimacy quickly. I remember how my partner would mirror my speech patterns, agree with my opinions, even order the same coffee as me. Looking back, it was textbook manipulation. What I didn't know then was that our brains are wired for small tribal groups, maybe 150 people max. In today's world of 8 billion strangers, that evolutionary programming becomes our biggest vulnerability. The prefrontal cortex that should protect us gets easily fooled by primitive emotional triggers. My partner knew exactly which buttons to push. The real warning signs were there from the beginning, but confirmation bias made me ignore them. When someone demonstrates excessive mirroring, rushes you into decisions, tells victims stories to activate your protective instincts, or gives disproportionate praise to lower your guard. These are neurological red flags. My partner did all of these, and I missed every single one. That's when I developed what I call the 30-day test. Week 1, observe behavior in neutral situations. Week 2, see how they react under light pressure. Week 3, share non-critical information and monitor if it leaks. Week 4, evaluate consistency between words and actions. If I'd done this with my partner, I would have saved myself 6 months of hell. The breaking point came during a client presentation. I'd shared our entire strategy with him, including backup plans and financial projections. When the client started asking tough questions, he threw me under the bus completely, blamed me for unrealistic expectations and poor planning, using my own confidential information against me. That's when Machiavelli's wisdom hit me like a truck. I started researching how successful people actually handle trust. Take Andy Grove from Intel. He implemented trust but verify decades before Reagan made it famous. He'd trust subordinates to execute, but always maintained independent verification systems. That approach saved Intel from multiple internal sabotages that could have killed the company. The contrast was stark when I looked at failures. Charles VI of England revealed complete military strategies to Parliament, trusting that English gentlemen would never betray their king. Those same gentlemen executed him in 1649. Sam Bankman-Fried trusted his Stanford inner circle with passwords and administrative access, facilitating the biggest crypto Ponzi scheme in history. After that disaster with my partner, I rebuilt my approach entirely. I started categorizing people into trust circles. Inner circle for maybe 3 people who could actually destroy me. Middle circle for strategic allies who know specific parts of my life. And outer circle for everyone else who gets only necessary information. It sounds cold, but it works. The key insight that changed everything was understanding that trust isn't binary. It's a spectrum that needs constant calibration. I learned to watch for subtle changes in language patterns, response times, new associations, and shifts in generosity. These signals tell you when someone's loyalty is wavering before they even realize it themselves. Looking back, that betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to my career. It forced me to develop what I call strategic paranoia, not cynicism, but intelligent skepticism based on evidence rather than emotion. I still trust people, but now I verify everything through independent channels. My business relationships became stronger, not weaker. The most successful people I know understand this intuitively. They share information strategically, build relationships in layers, and always maintain multiple sources of truth. They're not cruel or manipulative. They're just realistic about human nature. In a world where every click, conversation, and transaction can be recorded and used against you, blind trust is a luxury only fools can afford. But knowing when to trust is only half the battle. The real art lies in understanding how to structure those relationships strategically, creating circles of influence that protect you while still allowing for genuine connection. That's where most people fail, and where the next level of Machiavellian wisdom becomes absolutely crucial. It was never wise to trust men when one could use force. Niccolo Machiavelli. After my business partner betrayed me, I knew I needed a completely different system for managing relationships. I couldn't go through life trusting no one, but I also couldn't keep making the same naive mistakes. That's when I discovered what I call the 3 circles of strategic trust, a framework that's protected me for the past 5 years while still allowing genuine connections. The inner circle is sacred territory. Maximum 3 people who have access to your deepest vulnerabilities, future plans, and financial information. For me, that's my wife Sarah, my mentor from Goldman Sachs, and surprisingly, my younger brother, who's a lawyer in Denver. These are people who could literally destroy my life if they wanted to, which is exactly why they belong here. I learned this lesson during my divorce proceedings in 2020. My ex-wife had been in my inner circle for 8 years, and when things went south, she knew exactly where to hit. She had access to my business bank accounts, knew about my side investments, and understood my relationship with key clients. The damage was surgical and devastating because I'd given her the blueprint. The middle circle consists of about 12 people, strategic allies who know important parts of my life, but never the complete picture. My business partner David knows about our software company, but nothing about my real estate investments. My college friend Mike knows about my dating life, but has no idea about my business finances. Compartmentalization isn't cruel, it's survival. I remember testing this system during a major client negotiation last year. I told David we were aiming for a $50,000 contract, but I told my accountant we might close at $75,000. When David mentioned the $50,000 figure to someone else at a networking event, I knew exactly where that information came from. The system works. The outer circle includes everyone else, colleagues, acquaintances, casual friends who receive only information necessary for their specific function. They know I run a software company, but they don't know our revenue numbers. They know I'm dating someone, but they don't know her full name or where she works. Information is shared on a need-to-know basis, period. Moving people between circles requires specific criteria and careful observation. Last spring, I promoted my client Jessica from outer to middle circle after 18 months of consistent behavior. She'd proven reliable with smaller confidences, never gossiped about mutual contacts, and had actually protected my interests when she didn't have to. That earned her access to more strategic information. The downgrade process is equally important and much more common. My former best friend Tom got demoted from inner to middle circle when I noticed he'd started asking probing questions about my other relationships. Small changes in communication patterns, new associations with people I didn't trust, subtle shifts in loyalty. These are the warning signs most people miss until it's too late. I've watched successful people use this system instinctively. Warren Buffett shares investment strategies with maybe 5 people globally. Oprah built her empire with an inner circle of 3 trusted advisors who've been with her for decades. Even in Silicon Valley, the smartest entrepreneurs keep their core strategies compartmentalized across different advisors and investors. The psychological principle behind this is simple. Humans can only maintain genuine close relationships with about 5 people anyway. Everything else is social maintenance. By being intentional about trust allocation, you're not being antisocial. You're being realistic about cognitive limitations and human nature. What surprised me most was how this system actually improved my relationships. When people know they're in a specific circle, they respect the boundaries. Middle circle friends don't expect inner circle access, and they value the trust they do receive. It creates clearer expectations and reduces the emotional chaos that comes from undefined relationship boundaries. The key is transitioning smoothly between circles without creating resentment. I've learned to frame it as different roles for different people rather than levels of trust. My middle circle friends know they're valuable strategic allies. They just understand their specific domain of influence. It's about specialization, not hierarchy. But here's what most people get wrong about trust circles. They assume it's just about protecting information. The real power comes from learning to read people's true intentions before you even decide which circle they belong in. That skill alone has saved me more money and heartache than any other strategy I've ever learned. Men judge more by the eyes than by the hands. All can see, few can feel. Niccolo Machiavelli. I wish I'd learned this skill before my disaster with Tom, but sometimes the most expensive lessons become the most valuable ones. After restructuring my trust circles, I realized I needed to get better at reading people's real intentions before they even entered any circle. The ability to decode what people actually want, not what they say they want, has become my most powerful professional tool. The breakthrough came during a job interview in Chicago last year. I was hiring a marketing director, and this candidate named Rachel seemed perfect on paper. Impressive resume, great references, confident presentation, but something felt off. She provided excessive details about her previous successes, far more than necessary to demonstrate competence. Liars overcompensate with unnecessary information to appear credible. I started paying attention to micro patterns that most people miss completely. When Rachel talked about her collaborative leadership style, her shoulders tensed slightly and her voice pitched higher. When she described working with difficult clients, she unconsciously crossed her arms. Her body was contradicting her words, and I almost hired her anyway because she said all the right things. The real test came when I asked about her biggest professional failure. She launched into this perfectly crafted story about a campaign that didn't meet expectations due to external market factors. No ownership, no genuine reflection, just practiced deflection. Then I asked a follow-up question she hadn't prepared for and watched her scramble. The pause was too long, the answer too vague. I decided to dig deeper using what I call stress testing. I presented a hypothetical scenario about handling a crisis with an angry client and a tight deadline. Her response revealed everything. She immediately started assigning blame to theoretical team members and external circumstances. A genuine leader would have focused on solutions and taken ownership. That's when I knew her collaborative leadership was pure fiction. The contrast with my eventual hire was stark. When I asked Jennifer the same failure question, she paused thoughtfully and said, "I completely misread a client's brand voice and wasted 3 weeks on the wrong creative direction. I should have asked better questions up front." Real vulnerability, specific details, genuine ownership. Her stress test response focused entirely on problem solving and communication. I started applying this approach everywhere. Business meetings, networking events, even casual conversations. People reveal their true character through inconsistencies between verbal and non-verbal communication. When someone claims to be detail-oriented but their email has 3 typos, when they talk about work-life balance, while checking their phone constantly during dinner, when they praise teamwork but use I instead of we when describing group successes. The most dangerous people are those who've learned to control obvious tells but can't manage subtle patterns. My former client Stephen always maintained perfect eye contact and a confident posture, but I noticed he asked probing questions about my other clients, my revenue, my team structure, information that had no bearing on our project. He was mapping my business for reasons I couldn't understand yet. It turned out Stephen was planning to poach my entire team for his own competing agency. The warning signs were there for months. Sudden interest in my employee satisfaction, casual questions about my contracts and non-compete agreements, unexpected generosity with referrals that seemed designed to create obligation. I'd been so focused on his confident presentation that I missed the intelligence-gathering operation. Now, I watch for what I call information asymmetry. When someone tries to learn much more about you than they're willing to share about themselves. Genuine relationships involve mutual disclosure over time. Manipulative relationships involve one-sided extraction disguised as friendly curiosity. The difference becomes obvious once you know what to look for. The digital era has made this even more critical. People craft their online personas so carefully that face-to-face interactions become the only reliable source of authentic information. I pay attention to how quickly someone responds to texts versus emails, whether their social media matches their claimed values, how they treat service workers when they think nobody important is watching. What amazes me is how obvious these patterns become once you start looking. Most people are terrible at sustained deception because it requires too much cognitive energy. They'll slip back into authentic behavior during unguarded moments, when they're tired, distracted, or dealing with unexpected situations. Those moments reveal everything you need to know. The key insight that changed my entire approach to relationships was understanding that intentions leak through behavior patterns, not individual actions. One lie might be a mistake, but 3 inconsistencies reveal character. One moment of selfishness might be stress, but a pattern of self-interest reveals priorities. Reading people isn't about catching them in gotcha moments. It's about recognizing their authentic operating system. But knowing how to read intentions is just the beginning. The real advantage comes from understanding how to use silence strategically to make people reveal far more than they ever intended to share. He who listens always has an advantage over he who speaks. Niccolo Machiavelli. The most powerful negotiation tool I've ever discovered came from a complete accident during a salary review in 2019. I was sitting across from my boss, Marcus, asking for a $15,000 raise when my mind went completely blank. Instead of filling the awkward silence with nervous chatter like I usually did, I just sat there staring at him. What happened next changed how I approach every important conversation. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, then started talking to fill the void. He explained how budgets were tight, how the company was going through changes, how my performance was good but not exceptional. Then he paused, waiting for my response. I still had nothing coherent to say, so I stayed silent. After maybe 10 seconds, which felt like 10 minutes, he said, "But maybe we could do 12,000 and revisit it in 6 months." I learned later that silence triggers deep psychological discomfort in most people. When there's a conversational void, the human brain interprets it as social rejection and desperately tries to fix the problem by talking. The person who speaks first after making a proposal is automatically in the weaker position because they're showing they can't tolerate the pressure. Marcus couldn't handle the silence, so he negotiated against himself. That experience taught me what I now call the 5-second rule. After asking an important question or making a significant statement, I count to 5 before saying anything else. Most people start filling that space by the 3rd second, and what they say is usually far more revealing than their prepared responses. They tell you things they never intended to share because silence feels like disapproval. I started experimenting with this everywhere. During client meetings, I'd present our proposal and then shut up completely. The client would start explaining why they needed a lower price, revealing their actual budget and decision-making process. In team meetings, I'd ask someone's opinion and wait. They'd give their safe answer, then feel compelled to elaborate with their real thoughts during the pause. The technique works because silence feels like judgment to most people. When someone tells you about a problem and you respond with thoughtful silence instead of immediate advice, they assume you disapprove and start justifying their position. That justification usually contains the real story, the details they edited out of their initial version because they seemed embarrassing or irrelevant. I remember using this during a vendor negotiation last summer. The software salesperson quoted me $18,000 for a CRM system, and I just nodded slowly and stayed quiet. He immediately started explaining the value proposition, then offered training packages, then mentioned a special promotion that could bring it down to $14,000. I hadn't said a word, and he'd already reduced his price by 22%. The key is reading the silence correctly. Some people are comfortable with pauses and won't fill them automatically. Those are usually the people you need to watch most carefully because they're either naturally strategic or they've learned the same techniques I'm using. When I encounter someone who matches my silence with their own silence, I know I'm dealing with a worthy opponent. What surprised me most was how this affected my personal relationships. My girlfriend, Emma, used to get frustrated when I'd go quiet during arguments, thinking I was being passive-aggressive. But I explained that I was giving her space to express her real concerns without my immediate reactions derailing the conversation. Now, she appreciates those pauses because they help her organize her thoughts. The digital age has made strategic silence even more powerful. In email chains, being the last person to respond often means you get to frame the final narrative. In Zoom meetings, unmuting to ask a question and then staying unmuted during the silence puts subtle pressure on others to fill the space. Even in text conversations, delayed responses can create urgency and reveal how much someone actually needs something from you. I've also learned to combine silence with subtle body language for maximum effect. Leaning back slightly while staying quiet suggests skepticism. Leaning forward suggests intense interest in what they'll say next. Maintaining eye contact during silence can feel supportive or intimidating depending on the context. The silence isn't just absence of sound, it's active communication. The most advanced application is what I call selective echo. I'll repeat just the last word or phrase someone said, then stay silent. Challenging timeline, 15%, every quarter. They almost always expand on that specific point, often revealing information they hadn't planned to share. It's like giving them permission to explain what they really meant. But here's what most people don't realize about strategic silence. It only works if you genuinely have something valuable to offer. Empty silence from someone who has nothing to contribute just seems awkward. The power comes from the other person knowing you could speak but choosing not to, which suggests you're evaluating whether they're worth your input. However, silence is just one tool in the arsenal. The real multiplication of power comes from understanding how to create emotional debt through carefully calculated gestures of reciprocity. Benefits should be given little by little so that they may be better enjoyed. Niccolo Machiavelli. I discovered the true power of reciprocity during my first year as a freelance consultant in Denver. My biggest competitor was this guy named Paul, who seemed to land every major client in the city. I couldn't figure out his secret until I started paying attention to his approach at networking events. He never pitched his services directly. Instead, he'd casually mention valuable insights about industry trends, introduce people to each other, or share articles that were perfectly relevant to someone's current challenges. What Paul understood, and what took me months to figure out, is that reciprocity activates the same brain circuits as addiction. When someone does us a favor, our brain releases dopamine and creates genuine emotional debt. The prefrontal cortex goes into a state of cognitive tension until that debt gets repaid. Paul was essentially getting people high on his helpfulness, creating a neurological need to return the favor. The breakthrough came when I started tracking the pattern. Paul would give 3 valuable pieces of information or connections to a prospect over the course of 6 weeks, never asking for anything, never mentioning his consulting services, just being genuinely helpful. By the 7th week, when he finally mentioned he was available for project work, people felt almost obligated to hire him. He'd created $15,000 worth of perceived value through gestures that cost him maybe 2 hours total. I decided to test this approach with Jennifer, the marketing director at a growing startup downtown. Instead of pitching my services, I introduced her to my contact at Google Ads, who helped her save $4,000 on their monthly ad spend. 2 weeks later, I sent her a detailed analysis of her competitor's content strategy that would have cost $3,000 from an agency. I never asked for anything in return. The timing of reciprocity turns out to be crucial. Tuesday mornings work best for requests because cortisol levels are high and people make faster decisions. Right after someone has a success is perfect because they feel generous with themselves. Before vacations, people have elevated mood and lower resistance. I learned to track Jennifer's wins through social media and time my helpful gestures accordingly. When Jennifer's company finally needed a consultant 3 months later, I wasn't even competing against other vendors. She called me directly and asked about my availability. The $4,000 I'd helped her save had created a sense of debt that made hiring me feel like the natural next step. She even admitted later that she felt like she owed me the opportunity to propose. The key insight is asymmetric reciprocity, giving something that's cheap for you but valuable for others. Information costs me nothing but can be worth thousands to the right person. A strategic introduction takes 15 minutes but might generate $50,000 in opportunities for both parties. Public recognition through social media posts costs zero but feeds someone's ego for weeks. I started applying this systematically across my network. My former colleague David needed accounting software recommendations, so I connected him with my CPA, who negotiated a better deal than he could get alone. My neighbor Susan was job hunting, so I reviewed her resume and suggested improvements that helped her land interviews. My college friend Mike wanted to invest in real estate, so I shared market analysis from my real estate contacts. The return on these investments was remarkable, but not always direct. David referred 2 clients to me within 6 months. Susan's new company became a client 8 months later. Mike introduced me to his wealth management network, leading to 3 high-value consulting contracts. The reciprocity wasn't immediate or obvious, but it was inevitable because I'd created genuine emotional debt. But I also learned to recognize when others were using reciprocity against me. Unsolicited favors followed, where requests are huge red flags. When someone gives you something you didn't ask for and then seems to expect something in return, they're running the same playbook. The antidote is immediate reciprocity, returning the favor right away to avoid accumulating debt you didn't consent to. The digital era has amplified reciprocity's power exponentially. A well-timed LinkedIn recommendation can boost someone's career prospects significantly. Sharing someone's content to your network can increase their visibility by thousands of impressions. Even something as simple as leaving a thoughtful review for a small business owner can generate tremendous goodwill at zero cost to you. What most people get wrong is the dosage and frequency. They either give everything away at once, creating expectation instead of gratitude, or they wait too long between gestures, allowing the emotional debt to fade. The optimal approach is small, frequent value delivered consistently over time. It's like dripping water on a stone. Eventually, it carves permanent channels. The psychology behind this is simple but powerful. When someone helps us, we need to believe we like them to justify accepting the help. This cognitive dissonance forces our brain to rationalize the relationship positively. We literally talk ourselves into liking people who do us favors, even when those favors might have ulterior motives. However, reciprocity only works when you understand the invisible power structure you're operating within. Most people focus on impressing the obvious decision makers while completely ignoring the people who actually control access and information. To know well the nature of peoples, one must be a prince. To know well the nature of princes, one must be of the people. Niccolo Machiavelli. The most expensive mistake of my career happened because I completely misunderstood where power actually lived at TechFlow Systems. I spent 3 months courting the CEO, David Richardson, trying to land a $60,000 consulting contract. I took him to expensive dinners, created detailed presentations, even got referrals from mutual connections. He seemed enthusiastic about everything, but the contract never materialized. That's when I discovered I'd been barking up the wrong tree entirely. The real decision maker was David's executive assistant, Maria Santos, who'd been with the company for 12 years. She filtered every proposal that reached his desk, scheduled his priorities, and had his complete trust on vendor evaluations. Maria could kill any deal with a single comment like, "This doesn't seem urgent," or "Maybe we should wait until next quarter." I'd been trying to influence the face of power while ignoring the brain behind it. This revelation changed everything about how I approach new organizations. Now I spend my first week mapping the invisible power structure, not the official org chart. I look for 5 specific types of influence: the power broker who connects people, the information gatekeeper who filters access, the emotional influencer who affects mood, the historical keeper who knows precedents, and the future architect who designs scenarios. At TechFlow, Maria was clearly the information gatekeeper, but I discovered there were others. Tom Williams, a mid-level analyst, was the historical keeper. He'd been there 8 years and knew which strategies had failed before and why. Sarah Chen, the operations director, was the future architect. She modeled different growth scenarios, and her recommendations carried serious weight with the executive team. I started building relationships with these invisible influences instead of chasing the obvious targets. I brought Maria excellent coffee from the cafe she mentioned liking, always asked about her daughter's soccer season, and made sure to thank her publicly for her efficient coordination. With Tom, I'd ask thoughtful questions about the company's history and genuinely listen to his insights about past initiatives. The breakthrough came during a casual conversation with Sarah about industry trends. She mentioned being frustrated with their current data visualization tools, and I happened to know about a new platform that could solve her specific problems. I introduced her to my contact at the vendor, which saved TechFlow about $15,000 and made Sarah's quarterly analysis much more impressive to the board. Within 6 weeks, I wasn't pursuing the contract anymore. They were pursuing me. Maria started including me in email chains about upcoming projects. Tom would call me for quick consultations on historical context for new initiatives. Sarah recommended my services during a leadership meeting I wasn't even aware of. The $60,000 contract I'd been chasing turned into a $120,000 retainer because I'd finally understood the real decision-making ecosystem. This pattern repeats everywhere once you know what to look for. In my HOA, the real power doesn't belong to the president, but to Janet Morrison, the treasurer who's lived in the neighborhood for 23 years and maintains the relationship with our management company. At my gym, the trainer who influences which classes get scheduled isn't the fitness director, but Kevin, The maintenance guy who's been there since the place opened and knows every member by name. The corporate world is especially deceptive because titles and salaries rarely correlate with actual influence. I've seen junior analysts kill million-dollar deals because they were the ones who actually built the financial models that senior executives presented to boards. I've watched executive assistants determine which urgent requests actually reach busy CEOs and which ones get buried in the scheduling black hole. What makes this invisible power so dangerous is that most people don't even realize they have it. Maria probably didn't think of herself as a gatekeeper. She was just doing her job efficiently. But her definition of efficient could make or break my entire quarter. Understanding this dynamic means approaching these relationships with the respect and attention they actually deserve, not the courtesy most people think is sufficient. I started documenting power maps for every organization I work with. Who influences budget decisions beyond the CFO? Who do people really trust for technical advice beyond the CTO? Who gets consulted before major announcements beyond the communications team? These invisible advisors often have more practical power than the people with impressive titles because they have something more valuable than authority. They have genuine trust and detailed knowledge. The key insight that transformed my approach was realizing that visible power is performance, while invisible power is substance. The CEO has to act confident and decisive in public, but behind closed doors, he's often asking his trusted advisors what they really think. Those advisors, the people he calls at 10 p.m. or texts on weekends, those are the relationships that actually determine outcomes. Social media has made this mapping easier in some ways, but more complex in others. LinkedIn shows you official relationships, but you need to watch comment patterns and engagement to see where the real influence flows. Who likes the CEO's posts within minutes of posting? Who does he engage with most authentically? Who gets quoted or thanked in his major announcements? These digital breadcrumbs reveal the invisible advisory network. But understanding power structures is only half the battle. The real advantage comes from learning how to control the perception others have of you within those structures, which requires a completely different set of skills. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few feel what you are. Niccolo Machiavelli. I learned the brutal importance of perception management during what I call the LinkedIn crisis of 2021. I'd posted what I thought was an innocent critique of remote work policies, sharing my honest opinion that some companies were using flexibility as an excuse for poor management. Within 6 hours, that post had been screenshot, shared in multiple professional groups, and somehow interpreted as me being anti-remote worker. My phone started buzzing with angry messages from colleagues, and 2 potential clients suddenly went radio silent. The irony was devastating. I actually supported remote work and had been advocating for it at my own company for months. But perception became reality faster than I could control the narrative. That single post threatened to define my entire professional brand in a way that was completely opposite to my actual values and business practices. I realized that in our digital age, managing perception isn't just important, it's survival. The first thing I learned was the 48-hour crisis protocol. Hours 0 through 6, complete silence while gathering information about how the story is spreading. Hours 6 through 12, one factual response without emotion or defensiveness. Hours 12 through 24, pivot to positive content that demonstrates your actual values. Hours 24 through 48, let actions speak louder than words through concrete demonstrations of your real position. For my LinkedIn situation, I followed this exactly. During the silence period, I watched the post spread and took screenshots of the worst misinterpretations. At hour 8, I posted a brief clarification with specific examples of how I'd supported remote workers at my company. At hour 16, I shared an article about successful remote work implementations with thoughtful commentary. By hour 36, I was posting about a remote worker I'd just hired with genuine enthusiasm about her qualifications. What saved me was having different authentic versions of myself prepared for different platforms. My LinkedIn emphasized leadership and strategic thinking. My Instagram showed personal values through family time and community involvement. My Twitter focused on industry insights and thought leadership. When the crisis hit, people could check my other platforms and see consistency in my actual support. For work flexibility, just expressed differently for each audience. The key insight was understanding that authenticity doesn't mean sharing everything. It means being selectively genuine. I stopped posting random thoughts and started curating content that reinforced the professional perception I wanted to create. Every post, comment, and interaction became a deliberate choice rather than spontaneous expression. This wasn't being fake. It was being strategic about which authentic parts of myself to highlight. I started tracking what I call perception metrics across platforms. Reach versus engagement told me how many people saw my content versus how many connected with it. Sentiment analysis of comments showed whether people were associating me with positive or negative emotions. Association mapping revealed what topics and people were being connected to my brand. Call to action response rates showed whether my reputation was translating into actual business opportunities. The most powerful technique I discovered was calculated vulnerability. Instead of trying to appear perfect, I'd strategically share professional challenges and lessons learned. When a client project went sideways due to my poor communication, I wrote about it honestly, but focused on the systems I'd developed to prevent similar failures. People connected more with my growth story than they ever had with my success stories. I watched other professionals navigate perception disasters and learned from their mistakes. When my competitor Jake got called out for missing a major deadline, he went silent and tried to wait it out. The silence was interpreted as guilt, and his business suffered for months. Compare that to my colleague Amanda, who immediately acknowledged her mistake, outlined her correction plan, and documented her follow-through publicly. She turned a reputation crisis into a demonstration of accountability that actually strengthened her brand. The multiplier effect of controlled perception became obvious during client acquisition. People who'd never worked with me directly would reference my reputation for handling difficult situations well, or my transparent communication style. These perception-based referrals were coming from content I'd shared months earlier, proving that strategic authenticity compounds over time like investment returns. What surprised me most was how perception management improved my actual performance. When I knew that everything I did might become part of my professional story, I started making better decisions in real time. The accountability of potential public scrutiny made me more thoughtful about commitments, more careful about communication, and more intentional about delivering results. The digital landscape has made perception both more fragile and more powerful than ever before. A single screenshot can destroy years of relationship building, but a well-crafted response can reach thousands of potential collaborators. Every interaction is potentially permanent and searchable, which means the stakes are higher, but the opportunities are also exponentially greater. I now maintain what I call perception insurance, a documented track record of consistent values and actions across multiple platforms and time periods. When someone tries to mischaracterize my position or performance, I have months or years of evidence to support my actual character and competence. It's like having character, witnesses who never sleep and never forget. The most advanced practitioners I know understand that perception management isn't about manipulation. It's about clarity. You're helping people understand who you really are by removing the noise and highlighting the signal. In a world where everyone is overwhelmed with information, the person who can communicate their value clearly and consistently has an enormous advantage. But controlling perception is just one piece of a larger puzzle. The real multiplication of influence comes from understanding exactly when to deploy that carefully crafted image for maximum impact. He who neglects what is done for what ought to be done sooner effects his ruin than his preservation. Niccolo Machiavelli. The difference between a $50,000 success and a complete disaster came down to exactly 48 hours in March of 2022. I'd been negotiating a major contract with a manufacturing company in Phoenix, and everything was perfectly aligned. They needed my expertise, I had the bandwidth, and the budget was approved. But I made the fatal mistake of pushing the meeting back by 2 days to accommodate my schedule. In those 48 hours, their CEO got fired, the new leadership froze all consulting budgets, and my slam-dunk deal evaporated completely. That expensive lesson taught me that timing isn't just important, it's everything. The same proposal that would have been enthusiastically approved on Tuesday was dead in the water by Thursday. I realized I'd been treating timing like a convenience factor instead of recognizing it as the most critical variable in any strategic equation. Perfect execution at the wrong moment fails every single time. I started studying what I call opportunity windows and discovered 5 distinct moments when normal rules get suspended. Crisis moments happen when unexpected problems demand immediate solutions and people bypass usual decision-making processes. Transition moments occur during leadership changes, reorganizations, or major life events when new patterns haven't solidified yet. Success moments create overconfidence and reduced scrutiny of new proposals. The most valuable are distraction moments, when attention is focused elsewhere and you can move without interference. I remember pitching a process improvement project to a client while their entire executive team was consumed with a major acquisition. They approved my proposal in a 15-minute phone call because they didn't have bandwidth to overthink it. During normal times, that same project would have required months of committee reviews and competitive bidding. Need moments are pure gold. When someone desperately requires what you offer and their usual negotiating leverage disappears. Last year, a client's primary vendor failed catastrophically 2 weeks before a major product launch. They called me on a Friday afternoon, willing to pay double my normal rate for emergency consulting. I'd been trying to get their business for 18 months, but desperation accomplished in one phone call what months of relationship building couldn't. I learned to never schedule important conversations on Mondays. People are transitioning back to work mode and naturally resistant to new ideas. Fridays are equally bad because everyone's focused on finishing the week, not starting new initiatives. Tuesday through Thursday, preferably between 10 a.m. and noon, became my power window for crucial discussions when people are mentally sharp but not overwhelmed. The breakthrough came when I realized timing isn't just about external circumstances. You can actually create favorable timing through strategic preparation. When I wanted to propose expanding my role at a major client, I didn't just ask randomly. I waited until right after they'd received positive feedback about a project I'd managed, scheduled the conversation for a Tuesday morning, and made sure it happened before their quarterly budget reviews created artificial scarcity around new commitments. I started tracking the rhythm of every organization I worked with. Which months were budget-heavy versus budget-light? When did leadership teams make strategic decisions versus operational ones? What personal timing affected key decision-makers, kids' school schedules, vacation patterns, even sports seasons that might influence? Mood, These patterns became my strategic calendar for when to advance different types of requests. The contrast with poor timing was stark everywhere I looked. My competitor Lisa consistently pitched new clients during their fiscal year-end crunch when everyone was focused on closing existing business rather than starting new relationships. My colleague Mark always seemed to ask for referrals right after delivering bad news or disappointing results. They were great professionals with terrible timing, which made them far less successful than their skills deserved. What really opened my eyes was studying historical examples of perfect and disastrous timing. Churchill spent years warning about Hitler, but nobody listened until the threat became undeniable in 1940. His message never changed, but the timing finally aligned with reality. Compare that to Napoleon invading Russia in June 1812. Brilliant strategy executed too late in the season, leaving insufficient time before winter, destroyed his army. The digital era has compressed timing cycles dramatically. Opportunities that used to last weeks now disappear in hours. When a potential client posts about frustration with their current vendor, you have maybe 24 hours before they're flooded with outreach from competitors. When someone announces a new role on LinkedIn, the window for congratulations that turn into business conversations closes within 48 hours. I developed what I call timing triggers, specific signals that indicate optimal moments for different types of requests. Positive earnings announcements create expansion mindset for hiring decisions. Competitor failures open doors for vendor switches. Leadership promotions create budget flexibility for pet projects. Company awards generate willingness to invest in maintaining momentum. These signals became my action cues for moving from preparation to execution. The most sophisticated approach involves layered timing, aligning multiple favorable factors simultaneously. When I landed my biggest contract ever, it was because I'd waited for the perfect storm. Their old consultant had just disappointed them. Their busy season was ending, their new budget cycle was beginning, and the decision maker had just returned from a successful vacation. Any one of those factors might not have been enough, but together they created irresistible momentum. What most people miss is that timing works both ways. Knowing when not to act is as valuable as knowing when to move. I've saved myself from countless mistakes by recognizing when circumstances were wrong for my objectives, even when everything else seemed ready. Patience isn't passive waiting, it's active preparation for the right moment. But perfect timing means nothing without the right strategic relationships in place to capitalize on those moments. The most brilliant opportunist in the world can't succeed alone. It is much safer to be feared than loved when one has to choose between the two. Niccolo Machiavelli. The most painful business lesson I learned came from treating a temporary alliance like a permanent friendship. Back in 2020, my consulting partner Rachel and I had perfectly aligned interests. We were both bidding for contracts in the healthcare technology space, and collaboration made us stronger than either could be alone. We shared leads, split larger projects, and genuinely supported each other's success. I thought we were building something lasting until the market shifted and our interests suddenly diverged. When a major hospital system opened bidding for a 2-year digital transformation project worth $300,000, Rachel and I both wanted it desperately. The client suggested we could bid together, but Rachel had started positioning herself as the primary contractor while painting me as a subcontractor in her proposal. I discovered this during a casual conversation with the procurement director, who mentioned being impressed with Rachel's team. That's when I realized our alliance had been tactical for her all along, while I'd been thinking strategically. The betrayal stung initially, but it taught me the most valuable lesson about modern relationships. Alliances aren't friendships, they're contracts based on mutual benefit that expire when circumstances change. The mistake wasn't trusting Rachel, it was failing to recognize when our alliance had reached its natural end. Smart strategists anticipate these transitions and position themselves accordingly instead of being blindsided by inevitable shifts. I started categorizing every professional relationship into 3 types: convenience alliances based on temporary mutual benefit, necessity alliances forced by external circumstances, and values alliances built on shared principles. Most relationships fall into the first category, a few emerge from the second, and genuine values-based partnerships are incredibly rare. The key is never expecting more loyalty than the situation actually justifies. After the Rachel situation, I developed what I call alliance early warning signals. When someone's communication frequency drops from daily to weekly without obvious cause, when they start mentioning new contacts or opportunities you're not included in, when they begin asking probing questions about your other relationships, when their generosity with favors becomes more calculated. These patterns indicate shifting loyalty before it becomes obvious. I learned to compartmentalize information even within alliances. When I partnered with David on a series of workshops for small businesses, he knew about our joint marketing strategy, but nothing about my separate corporate consulting clients. When Sarah and I collaborated on a research project, she understood our shared methodology, but not my plans for licensing it independently. This wasn't deception, it was maintaining options if circumstances changed. The most sophisticated technique I developed was testing alliance strength without compromising the relationship. I'd share non-critical but true information with each ally and monitor whether it stayed confidential. I'd observe how they reacted when I faced minor setbacks or challenges. I'd present hypothetical scenarios where our interests might diverge and watch their responses. These tests revealed character without requiring real sacrifice. The dissolution process became just as important as the formation process. When my alliance with marketing consultant Jennifer reached its natural end, I didn't ghost her or create conflict. I gradually reduced our collaboration frequency while offering something valuable as a graduation gift, an introduction to a potential client who was perfect for her but wrong for me. She appreciated the graceful transition, and we maintained positive neutrality that eventually led to referrals. I started studying successful alliance builders and noticed they all operated the same way. Jeff Bezos built Amazon through temporary partnerships with publishers while secretly developing infrastructure to bypass them. Franklin Roosevelt maintained separate alliances with Churchill and Stalin, knowing they were incompatible long-term but necessary for defeating Hitler. Taylor Swift collaborates strategically with artists from different genres to expand her audience without committing permanently to any musical style. The contrast with alliance failures was equally instructive. WeWork's Adam Neumann burned bridges with investors and partners by treating temporary alliances like permanent enemies when interests diverged. Hitler broke his non-aggression pact with Stalin, creating unnecessary enemies on multiple fronts simultaneously. These leaders failed because they couldn't adapt their relationship strategies to changing circumstances. What surprised me most was how much stronger my alliances became once I stopped expecting them to be permanent. When people know the partnership has clear boundaries and mutual respect for eventual divergence, they invest more energy in making it successful during its natural lifespan. Nobody feels trapped, nobody feels deceived, and transitions happen smoothly when the time comes. The digital era has made alliance management both easier and more complex. LinkedIn makes it simple to maintain loose connections with former allies. Social media provides early warning signals about changing loyalties through posting patterns and new associations. But the speed of business also means alliances can form and dissolve much faster than traditional relationship timelines. I now maintain what I call alliance portfolios, multiple strategic partnerships across different domains that aren't dependent on each other. If one alliance ends, others continue providing value and opportunities. This diversification prevents any single relationship change from damaging my overall strategic position. It's the professional equivalent of not putting all your investment eggs in one basket. The key insight that transformed my approach was understanding that fluid alliances actually create more trust than rigid ones, because they're based on honest recognition of human nature. When someone knows you respect their right to pursue their best interests, they're more likely to be genuine about their current intentions. Paradoxically, expecting less loyalty often generates more reliable cooperation. But managing alliances effectively is only half the battle. The other half involves dealing strategically with people whose interests will always conflict with yours, and that requires a completely different set of skills. If you have to injure someone, do it in such a way that you need not fear his revenge. Niccolo Machiavelli. I never wanted enemies in business, but I learned the hard way that you don't get to choose whether you have them. You only get to choose how you manage them. This lesson hit home during my second year of consulting when a competitor named Marcus started systematically undermining my reputation with shared clients. He'd make subtle comments about my limited experience or suggest that my pricing was suspiciously low for quality work. I tried ignoring it, hoping professionalism would prevail, but ignoring an active enemy just gave him more time to organize against me. The turning point came when I lost a major client renewal to Marcus, and the client mentioned concerns about my reliability issues, something Marcus had planted based on one project where I'd been 2 days late due to a family emergency. That's when I realized that managing enemies isn't about being cruel or vindictive. It's about protecting yourself from people who are actively working against your interests. Hoping they'll stop on their own is naive and dangerous. I started categorizing the different types of opposition I faced. Active enemies attack you directly and openly. Marcus fell into this category with his reputation sabotage campaign. Passive enemies work behind the scenes, spreading doubt or withholding support when you need it. Occasional enemies only oppose you on specific issues, but might be allies in other contexts. Potential enemies aren't adversaries yet, but your interests are clearly heading toward collision. For active enemies like Marcus, I learned that documentation and exposure work better than direct confrontation. I started keeping records of every interaction, taking screenshots of problematic emails, and building a timeline of his interference patterns. When the opportunity arose, during a networking event, I casually mentioned to mutual contacts that I'd noticed some unprofessional behavior in our shared market space, providing specific examples without naming names initially. The key breakthrough was understanding that most enemies aren't actually personal. They're pursuing their interests in ways that conflict with yours. Marcus wasn't attacking me because he disliked me personally. He was trying to eliminate competition for a limited number of high-value clients. Once I understood his motivation, I could address the root cause instead of just the symptoms. I decided to make Marcus irrelevant rather than trying to defeat him directly. Instead of competing for the same clients in healthcare technology, I pivoted toward financial services, where my background was actually stronger. I also started partnering with larger consulting firms that could offer the established reputation that Marcus was using against me. Within 6 months, we weren't even competing for the same opportunities anymore. The most effective technique I discovered was what I call productive channeling, redirecting enemy energy toward mutual benefit. When my former colleague Jennifer started criticizing my approach to project management in professional forums, I invited her to co-present a workshop on different methodologies for different client types. Her criticism became a valuable counterpoint that made both of us look more thoughtful and comprehensive. Prevention became even more valuable than management. I learned to identify potential conflicts before they escalated by mapping where my growth ambitions might threaten others. When I wanted to expand into the non-profit sector, I reached out to established consultants in that space, asked for advice, and offered to refer overflow work to them. Instead of seeing me as a threat, they became allies who helped me understand the market dynamics. The digital era has made enemy management more complex but also more trackable. Social media provides early warning systems for brewing conflicts. You can see when someone starts liking your competitors' posts more frequently or stops engaging with your content. But it also means that professional disputes can go viral quickly, so the stakes are higher for mismanaging these relationships. I studied how successful people handle opposition and found consistent patterns. Steve Jobs converted Eric Schmidt from ally to competitor and back to respectful neutral by focusing on business interests rather than personal animosity. Oprah transformed media rivals into occasional collaborators by creating opportunities for mutual benefit. Warren Buffett neutralizes critics by acknowledging their valid points publicly while demonstrating superior results privately. The contrast with enemy management failures was equally instructive. Martin Shkreli created unnecessary enemies across media, government, and industry simultaneously, making it impossible to find allies when he needed them. Travis Kalanick at Uber turned every regulatory challenge into personal warfare, escalating conflicts that could have been resolved through negotiation. Both leaders had the resources to manage opposition strategically, but chose confrontation instead. What surprised me most was how often enemies become allies once the underlying conflict gets resolved. Marcus and I actually ended up partnering on a large project 2 years later when a client needed both our skill sets. The key was that neither of us took the original competition personally, so we could collaborate when circumstances changed. Professional enemies aren't permanent unless you make them permanent through poor management. The most advanced practitioners understand that reputation with enemies matters as much as reputation with allies. How you treat people who oppose you signals your character to everyone else watching. When I had to compete against former colleagues for contracts, I always spoke respectfully about their capabilities while clearly differentiating my approach. This earned respect from clients who valued professionalism over politics. I now maintain what I call enemy intelligence, understanding their motivations, tracking their strategies, and anticipating their next moves without becoming obsessed or paranoid. It's like playing chess, where you respect your opponent's capabilities while planning your own strategy. The goal isn't to destroy them, it's to achieve your objectives despite their opposition. The ultimate insight that changed everything was realizing that how you handle enemies defines your character more than how you treat friends. Anyone can be nice to people who support them. The real test of strategic maturity is managing opposition with intelligence, dignity, and effectiveness. That skill alone separates amateur players from true professionals. But even the most skilled enemy management is reactive. The real multiplication of power comes from learning when to reveal information strategically, controlling the narrative before conflicts even develop. It is better to act and repent than not to act and repent. Niccolo Machiavelli. The most expensive piece of information I ever shared cost me approximately $80,000 in lost revenue, and I gave it away for free during what I thought was casual conversation. I was having drinks with my colleague Brian after a conference in Chicago. and he mentioned struggling to land a particular type of client. Without thinking, I shared the exact methodology I'd developed for breaking into that market. The research approach, the ideal contact timing, even the specific value propositions that had worked for me. 3 months later, Brian landed 5 major contracts using my playbook while I watched from the sidelines. That painful lesson taught me that information has a half-life. It loses value exponentially over time, but it also has peak moments when it becomes incredibly powerful. The art isn't just knowing what you know, it's calculating exactly when that knowledge will have maximum impact and minimum cost to you. Share too early, and others have time to prepare counter-strategies. Share too late, and the information becomes irrelevant, or someone else breaks the story first. I started developing what I call information valuation, a framework for calculating when each piece of knowledge should be deployed. Urgency measures how much time before it loses relevance. Exclusivity tracks how many people know it. Impact evaluates what decisions it could influence. Risk assesses what problems it might create for you. Competition timing considers whether others might reveal it first. These 5 factors create a mathematical model for strategic disclosure. The breakthrough came during a complex client negotiation where I knew their current vendor was about to lose a major contract due to performance issues. Instead of revealing this immediately to prove my insider knowledge, I let the conversation develop naturally. When they expressed frustration with vendor management in general, I mentioned hearing through industry channels that vendor transitions were becoming more common. This prompted them to share the specific details of their current problems, making them feel like they were confiding in me rather than being sold to. I learned to defend against information extraction by recognizing the tactics others used on me. When someone asks probing questions disguised as casual conversation, I respond with strategic ambiguity. I've heard some interesting things about that situation, but I'd want to verify the details before sharing anything specific. This acknowledges their interest without revealing my actual knowledge level. The key is making them work harder for information while appearing cooperative. Strategic bluffing became one of my most powerful tools for gathering intelligence. By saying something like, "I heard changes are coming to your department," I could extract real information without actually knowing anything specific. People naturally want to correct incomplete information, so they'd often reveal far more than they intended while setting the record straight about their situation. The cascading revelation technique proved especially effective during complex business development. I'd share one small, true but non-critical piece of information to establish credibility, which would encourage others to reciprocate with something more valuable. This created a trading dynamic where each party felt they were getting insider knowledge, while I controlled the flow and timing of what got revealed. I remember using this during a partnership negotiation with a software company in Austin. I mentioned that I'd noticed increased demand for their type of solution in my client base, which was true but vague. This prompted them to share specific revenue projections and growth targets they were trying to hit. Armed with their actual numbers, I could tailor my proposal to exactly what they needed to achieve those goals, making our partnership feel essential rather than optional. The digital era has accelerated information cycles dramatically. What used to be quarterly business intelligence now changes monthly or weekly. When a potential client posts about vendor frustrations on LinkedIn, you have maybe 24 hours before 10 competitors reach out with solutions. The window for leveraging exclusive information has compressed, but the advantage of moving first has amplified proportionally. I developed information triggers, specific signals that indicate optimal moments for strategic disclosure. Competitor failures create receptivity to alternative approaches. Leadership changes open doors for sharing insights about industry trends. Budget cycles make financial information more valuable. Public successes generate interest in methodologies. These triggers became my timing mechanism for moving from preparation to revelation. The most sophisticated approach involves layered disclosure, revealing information in carefully sequenced stages to maintain leverage throughout extended interactions. During a 6-month sales cycle with a healthcare client, I shared insights about industry, regulations in month 1, competitive intelligence in month 3, and specific implementation strategies in month 5. Each revelation built on the previous one while keeping them engaged for the full timeline. What most people don't understand is that the power of information comes from its scarcity, not just its accuracy. Everyone has access to the same public data, but very few people have the discipline to gather intelligence systematically and deploy it strategically. The advantage comes from being patient enough to wait for the right moment and confident enough to act when that moment arrives. I learned to recognize when others were applying these same techniques against me. Unsolicited information sharing, especially when it seems designed to prompt reciprocal disclosure, became a red flag. When someone offers valuable insights without clear motivation, they're usually fishing for something more valuable in return. The antidote is gracious appreciation without immediate reciprocation, thanking them while maintaining your information boundaries. The key insight that transformed my approach was understanding that information warfare isn't about hoarding knowledge. It's about timing disclosure for maximum strategic advantage. The same fact can be worthless on Monday and worth thousands on Friday, depending on what else is happening in your target's world. Mastering this timing is what separates tactical operators from strategic masterminds. But having great information and perfect timing means nothing without the systems and relationships in place to capitalize on those advantages. That's where building lasting influence becomes essential. Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved. Niccolo Machiavelli. 5 years ago, I thought success meant being the smartest person in the room. Today, I measure success by how many people can execute my strategies effectively, without me being there. The transformation from tactical operator to strategic architect didn't happen overnight, but it started with a simple realization. Everything I'd learned about trust, influence, timing, and power meant nothing if it died with me. True strategists don't just win. They create systems that keep winning long after they've moved on to new challenges. The shift began when my former client, Jessica, called me 18 months after our project ended. She was implementing the vendor evaluation framework I taught her team, and it had just saved her company $200,000 on a software procurement. She didn't need my help anymore. She'd internalized the methodology and was teaching it to others. That moment crystallized something profound. My highest value wasn't in doing the work myself, but in creating capabilities that multiplied far beyond my direct involvement. I started documenting everything systematically using what I call the 5-year legacy framework. Year 1 focuses on building demonstrable competence through measurable results that nobody can dispute. Year 2 emphasizes developing influence networks, identifying 10 people who can amplify your ideas, and mentoring 3 who can implement your methods independently. Year 3 involves systematizing knowledge into frameworks others can apply successfully. Year 4 requires implementing at least one system that functions without your presence while establishing processes others will continue using. Year 5 demands earning respect from competitors, not just allies, while demonstrating that your methods work for others. The most surprising discovery was that legacy building actually accelerated my current success rather than competing with it. When I started teaching my client acquisition methodology to select consultants, referrals increased dramatically because I'd created a network of people who understood and could validate my approach. When I documented my project management frameworks, clients began requesting them specifically, positioning me as the originator rather than just another vendor. I began tracking what I call legacy metrics to measure real influence beyond immediate financial returns. Adoption rate showed how many people were using my methods. Attribution tracked how often I was cited as a reference or source. Continuation measured how many projects I'd started continued without my involvement. Influence network counted how many successful people had learned from my approaches. System integration evaluated how many of my innovations had become standard practice in organizations I'd touched. The digital landscape offered unprecedented opportunities for legacy multiplication. A well-crafted article about strategic thinking could influence thousands of professionals for decades. A methodology shared with the right people could spread through entire industries. I stopped thinking about content creation as marketing and started treating it as architecture, building intellectual infrastructure that would generate value long after I'd forgotten posting it. The key insight that revolutionized my approach was understanding the difference between manipulation and strategic leadership. Manipulators extract value for short-term personal gain while destroying trust and relationships. Strategic leaders create sustainable value that benefits multiple parties over time, building systems that generate increasing returns. The techniques might look similar superficially, but the intentions and outcomes are completely different. I started applying all 12 principles I'd learned as an integrated system rather than isolated tactics. I calibrated trust carefully but built relationships strategically. I read intentions accurately but responded with appropriate timing. I managed alliances fluidly while handling enemies professionally. I controlled perception deliberately while revealing information strategically. Each principle amplified the others, creating exponential rather than additive results. The ultimate test came during a crisis that threatened to destroy everything I'd built. A former client publicly accused me of overcharging and under-delivering, posting detailed complaints on social media that began spreading through professional networks. Instead of panicking or attacking back, I applied the 48-hour crisis protocol, documented the actual project outcomes with metrics, reached out to my influence network for perspective, and responded with facts while pivoting to positive demonstrations of value. What saved me wasn't any single technique, but the integrated system I'd built over years. My trust circles provided accurate intelligence about how the story was spreading. My timing awareness helped me respond when maximum people were paying attention. My alliance network offered support and counter-narratives. My enemy management skills prevented the situation from escalating. My information control kept me from revealing anything that could be used against me. The crisis actually strengthened my reputation because people could see how I handled pressure professionally. The most profound realization was that Machiavellian strategy isn't about being ruthless or manipulative. It's about being realistic about human nature while building systems that align individual interests with collective success. The most effective leaders understand that sustainable power comes from being indispensable rather than feared, from creating value rather than extracting it, from building networks rather than destroying competitors. Looking back, every principle I'd learned served a larger purpose, developing the judgment to navigate complex human dynamics while maintaining ethical standards and achieving meaningful objectives. The trust calibration prevented naive mistakes. The influence mapping revealed real decision makers. The timing mastery maximized impact. The alliance building created sustainable partnerships. The enemy management maintained professional reputation. The information control protected strategic advantages. Now I mentor other professionals using this integrated approach, and I'm consistently amazed by how quickly they progress once they understand these principles as a complete system rather than random tactics. The combination of strategic thinking with ethical application creates leaders who achieve their goals, while elevating everyone around them. That's the legacy worth building, not just personal success, but systematic improvement in how business relationships actually work. The game never ends, but the rules become clearer once you understand them. You can choose to remain naive and be exploited by others who understand power dynamics, or you can learn these principles and use them to create value while achieving your objectives. Machiavelli gave us the map. How you use it determines not just your success, but your character. The choice, as always, is yours.